will introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you. Well, it's a great pleasure to welcome Jenny Raggett to our talk this evening. I just want to say that, I'm looking at Jenny's history by doing a bit of Google searching. You come to the conclusion she's very much a Renaissance woman. She is, going through the list here, a technical writer on computers and the history of the internet, allegedly. She's also now operating as an artist, working in stained glass and fabrics, based at the Silk Mill in Frome. She is a long-standing environmental campaigner and has been involved with Wiltshire CPRE in various guises. She is a founder member and lead researcher with Transport for New Homes. And it's this that we're looking at today, really, the work that they've done. In 2020, she helped research and write a report entitled Garden Villages and Garden Towns, Visions and Reality. And that work that they produced terms into urban planning such as unicorns and cowpats. And cowpats is a word that I know the Civic Society have been banding around for a few months now, and we're very popular with us. And that report was the basis of Jenny's talk this evening. So welcome very much.
I suppose I started a project off, I think it was 2018, called Transport for New Homes. What happened was these people, the Foundation for Integrated Transport, they really kicked off the project by properly funding an idea that I had that something was going wrong. Everywhere I went in the country, I could see these horrible housing estates, and they were all based around the car. And I just thought, why is this happening? How? I want to find out. I mean, I'm not a planner. My background is really in science and technology. But I suppose I've got the kind of mind I wanted to understand what is going on. Anyway, I bid for money and I got it, and so we formed a team with some people who were proper planners, and so I was really fortunate to get a good group of people together. And now that works, right? So it explains that. So here we have it. This really is summed up. We don't just go and have a look at elaborate PDF files and descriptions of what is going to be built. We go and have a look. I mean, that is the essence of the project. So, we come across all these things, vibrant places, healthy, low carbon, etc. Fine words, but let's actually go and have a look. And that has differentiated ourselves from lots of other groups of people, as far as I can make out. So off we went, and let me see if it worked. So we purposely went for a mix of places because we wanted to do compare and contrast. And so we went to Urban Regeneration Project. This is in London. We even went out of the country. We went to the Netherlands. And this is a brand new town centre with a bicycle shop to open, etc. In an area of new build, which we met the planners from the Netherlands, and we even stayed in a new urban extension. And I can go into great detail now, but we did learn that in the Netherlands, they do things entirely differently from here. And the planners, rather than the developers, do lead the way, which I'll come back to later. But back in England, off we went. Here we are, going around the various greenfield developments in England. That's a classic one, really. That's what they tend to look like. The green area is floodplain, and we speak to residents in these places. And we were told here that when the River Avon flooded, that people actually went fishing in that area, and somebody told us they found 7 different kinds of fish, 7 fish, that had come up down from the stream, and we just found it quite amusing. Other than that, they said, well, we don't really use that bit because it's very wet. And there are the houses. And, you know, that was fairly typical. When it came to greenfield development, yeah, the most important thing, we couldn't believe just how much tarmac there was everywhere. I mean, it was dire. You know, there seemed to be parking everywhere, or roads or driveways. Places were entirely dominated by tarmac, and it was depressing. You know, it was unexpected that it could be this bad. But of course, these places are purely for people who can drive. So in a way, it's expected. Um, so in fact, it wasn't just the look and feel. The whole lifestyles in these places were all about driving. We asked people, and they had 2 or 3 cars per home. That was quite common. And we did a rough calculation. We thought 40% of the residential streets were tarmac. And we went to have a look at so-called local centres, and they were just the same. They turned out to be usually a sort of American style mini mall, I suppose, with a big car park. And we didn't see people walking there. You know, this. So from when you look on Google, you can see the problem more clearly. If you look, you've got behind each group of houses a whole area devoted to parking, and the gardens incredibly small. You know, we just we will. This is what shocked us the most, I suppose. Now, we didn't see people walking around. It was an eerie feeling to go to these places during the day. But at about 5 o'clock, the cars would arrive. People just poured in. You know, it was like some deluge of cars arriving. That was just what we saw. So more often than not, this kind of development was associated with the road, you know, a new link road, a bypass, ring road, and of course, what happens is that directly you do that, and you can see here how all of these new housing estates ultimately are accessed off British bypass. The effect on the town centre is quite interesting because at every roundabout, something starts to happen. It could be out of town retail, out of town leisure. We've seen out of town residential homes for the elderly off bypasses. We've seen kind of American style country parks, even so called, where you have to go by car. And all in all, I think it's called the donut effect. The town centre shops begin to suffer as people go out of town, making use of the cheap or free parking, to out of town retail, business parks, leisure centres, the lot. And so the lesson is that orientating new development around new roads and the car has really far-reaching consequences for the whole place. It's common sense, but when you've gone a tour, you can see it happen. So here we are. I just summed up some of these themes, the other things we saw. Few places to actually walk or cycle to. People say, oh, we're going to have a walkable community. Well, where do you actually walk to? Good question. Also, we've seen a lot of new homes cut off by major roads. So we've seen ring roads with the new housing on one side and the town on the other. And then comes the question, how do you get people across? So underpasses, complicated crossing points with traffic lights, all kinds of things. But ultimately, the new homes have been built in the wrong place for walking and cycling. And therefore, there are no safe or lit walking and cycling routes into town. So people say, oh, but the town centre is only 2 miles away. Well, that's quite a long walk. And certainly when you come to an underpass, under a bypass, you really don't need to go that way, which I've mentioned the fringe of town sprawl, which is associated with this kind of development and which ultimately destroys, we see, town centre vitality. Another thing, footpaths into the countryside. These places, the footpaths are often severed. So the developer just makes does the, build the houses. And then you see that the footpath ends. And it's not as though, although people are told, come and live in this wonderful place, it's in the countryside. It's not as though the countryside has really merged properly with this new development. The development abruptly finishes at the red line on the map, and then footpaths and so on, well, possibly, that's all we can say, but not really factored in. We looked at stations. We did some actual data on how far stations were and how frequent the services were. Most places, Cranbrook New Town was probably an exception. It's got a new station, although not in the new development, but not too far. Buses, we found that they often didn't go through the actual development, but stopped at a roundabout near it. So that was another problem. But we were, when we went to urban sites that built on brownfield lands in our cities and bigger towns, it was completely different. So this is Bath Riverside. You may have been there, I don't know, but it's a development in Bath. It was different, really, because it's built in the context of existing walking routes, public transport. There are shops you can walk to, just Sainsbury's just near him. And parking dominates much less because there's only room for one, I think it's one parking space per home development, and that's very common. And it's underground mostly. So a completely different way of doing things. The land, having released it from, having not built loads of tarmac everywhere, is more like a park. And it's nice for local people because they come here and, you can go and sit in this new area created by Bath Riverside Development and enjoy a cafe, workspace and so on. So it's quite pleasant, in fact. And we found that was true for a lot of brownfield development. They were quite nice. Now, there's one development that was completely different from anywhere else. It was just completely different, and so much so that it kind of ticked all the boxes that everyone else said they were looking to tick. It was designed. We were lucky. Yeah, when we went to Poundbury, we actually met the planners at a farmhouse in Poundbury, and we spoke to them about how Poundbury was done. Really,
how long ago?
this was about 2018. And, we heard, for example, and this is really critical, because we said, how come all the employment, the shopping and everything else isn't just often a roundabout on the bypass? And we were told, oh no, Prince Charles wouldn't have that. He can't stand all that. It's actually integral to the town, and that's just so important. And then there was someone there from Dorset County Council Highways, I think, or whatever, or Western, anyway. We asked him, how come the road layout here was allowed? Because we were under the impression you weren't allowed to do things. I said, yes, well, once again, I'm afraid Prince Charles and his planners just simply said, no, we're doing it this way, and that's all there is to it, actually. And they did. So there's so many things that the detail and the vision. I think the real thing is the vision of it all. To have things in town, I can't tell you, that is the key. You know, to have it. So the garden centre is in town. It's not out of town. The garden centre is brilliant. And in fact, we met some residents in the garden centre. Because in our first visits, we always spoke to residents. So we would get through various means, we find residents to speak to. We met them in the garden centre. We just, anyway, we need to say no more, but there's nowhere quite like it. Except I was explaining that we started at conferences to go on about Poundbury, and we found that this was considered rather unfashionable, and that we weren't really meant to talk about it. And then people came up at the end, and they would sort of say, "Thank you very much for mentioning Poundbury," as though this was a big faux pas. It's like, ooh. Anyway, we realised then that there's some, still I still haven't got to the bottom of it, but there's something about Poundbury. It's not standard, we were told, and various other, anyway. So, right.
Has anybody else tried to implement some of the same
Oh, yes.
features?
Yes, I'll come to that later. Yes, but I don't know if they work. Anyway, we did our report, everything we saw, and all of a sudden, it got immense coverage on the media, and I just couldn't believe it. It was crazy. And I could only assume that somehow there was so much of this going on, and that people were really interested. But we got coverage in the technical press as well. I have to say we had a very good press officer, really good. She was brilliant. And I think that helped a lot. And also, I think making the report highly visual with headlines. We used a lot of almost Daily Mail headlines, grab people's attention, which maybe is the trick. Anyway, meanwhile, others were also on the case. So Lord Matthew Taylor, I don't know if you've come across him, but he was working at the Policy Exchange at the time. He worked with them and did a report on Garden Village. And this is what he said. He said, Midlands far too often get exactly the thing they fear: ugly, dense housing estate on their doorstep with added traffic and congestion on local roads, and the council taxpayers financing inadequate services. To make development more popular, we need to recognise the NIMBYs have a point. We need to say so, and we need to do something about it. So that was Matthew Taylor. So we decided we wanted to meet him. So somehow it was arranged, and we went to have tea with him at the House of Lords. And I think he was quite frustrated, actually, because what he suggested, let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so what he suggested was, can I find, I might have missed it out. Maybe I have. What he suggested anyway was that we needed to do something perhaps more along the Dutch lines, which is that when you sell land as a farmer for development, you don't reap all the benefits yourself, you are the developer, but that the uplift in land value is captured for the public benefit. And this happens in the Netherlands. And it means a vast amount of money is released for all kinds of things to make a place. So it's a different model. So this Matthew Taylor had put forward this as one way, this idea of capturing the uplift in land value, which is tremendous. I mean, it's sort of, I think he said something like, what was it? 400,000 per acre goes, well, it's several million. I mean, the uplift is fantastic. And there is a lot of money, therefore, to be made as a farmer selling your land. And at a time when farmers are struggling, you can see that, they might want to sell it for development. farming being the same as this. Yeah, he didn't talk about the whole problem of housing numbers, which I'll come to later. And he didn't really talk about location, which surprised me. This, for example, is just the way that the red line is just drawn round field. So this is the beginning of the Calpac development. I don't think he was as interested in that as we thought he would. You can't see the numbers here, but we've also put together adjacent local plans, which this is hardly ever done, to see how many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of houses are planned across a big area of countryside, really. And it's a vast number. And, in all those places, there will be several developments. Anyway, so it says here, his solution instead was based on land value uplift. Here he said that an acre of farmland that might be worth £8,000, and this was a few years ago, could be worth around 400,000 or more once it's got planning permission. Now, those are old figures. Probably people may know what figures are now, but you can see that even before infrastructure has been put in place, and the land value uplift is captured mostly by the landowner when they sell the land to the developer. And so he decided that quality, design and placement are all squeezed out because the price paid for the land makes financing quality and services unviable. That was his theory as to where we should be looking to put the system. Meanwhile, quite separate to that and not doing land value uplift and so on, in 2018, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government released the Garden Communities Prospectus. They encouraged local authorities and the private sector, that's right, to come forward and tell them how they could assist them in delivering the government vision for new garden communities. Now, this stems back about more than a century to the ideas of Ebenezer Howard on Garden City, like Welland Garden City and Letchworth Garden City. Now, I've definitely been to Letchworth and had a tour, and it's very nice. I have to say, it is nice. But, of course, these garden cities were before the motor car, and that is a very big difference. So, did all this government talk about garden communities and a whole prospectus and you could bid for money, was it really going to, did it herald a change? So once again, we went off and we started visiting what now were a series of new garden towns. Some towns had been told they were now garden towns and they'd got money from the government, and we went to have a look at their new development. And we also looked at the plans for several garden villages. And using this, we did a report. Now, the garden town, we went and had a look at Bicester, Aylesbury, Basingstoke, Ebbsfleet, Taunton and Didcot, all now garden towns. And really, this photo tells the story. As you can see, it's about roads. Sorry, but both of them are. Aylesbury, I would say, was the most shocking, probably. I don't know if people know it. It was anyway, I won't go into the details, but it was a bit high. I think this is a view of a new area of Basingstoke Garden Town. You can see it on Google. And by contrast, once again, the brownfield sites in these places quite often really well done. And this is Taunton, it's just an area quite near the station. I think it's called Firepool or something. Anyway, it's a new area that's been developed quite near the station in Taunton, along the river. And it's you know, it's got quite a lot going for it. And you can walk into town and you can go to the station. So it's the same thing, you know, there seems to be a lot more creative effort gone into brownfield sites and, I mean, that's our experience so far. I'm not saying they're all good, but, you know, we've seen some quite nice ones. What about the garden villages? Well, the more we looked at these garden villages, the more we looked to see what the government money was paying for, the more surprised we were. It turned out, maybe it's a bit too, but in nearly every case, it was a major road system or a motorway junction had to be improved first to enable the garden village. So, and or town, in fact, lots of them. So, you know, as we say, many that we looked at, and even now, nothing seems to be happening. But the road is the first thing to be done. And it did seem odd to us, considering the emphasis on self-contained, walkable streets. I mean, that's what they're supposed to be. But most garden villages were predicated on bigger motorway junction, new bypass or link road because of the massive amount of traffic anticipated. And Homes England, which is, you know, government body, had money to facilitate it. If you can't read very well the detail, but I have got with me some reports, and so if you're interested, you can see. But it just struck us as really most peculiar, actually. So, you know, whereas Ebenezer Howard, he said all this, these lovely things, the advantages of the most energetic and active town life with the beauty and delight of the countryside may be secured in perfect combination. So that was the kind of thing he said. And then, so you can imagine, you know, what we felt as we went round modern England, some of these greenfield estates. And because I like sketching, I'm afraid I started drawing pictures of flowers talking. So, you know, the 24-hour supermarket is a 5-minute drive along the bypass, and so is the new pub. I mean, that just sums up a lot of the lifestyle. And the other one, what was it? Oh dear, yeah, the gardens are so small. Yes, such tiny gardens. I can't read that. Yes, I'll have to stay myself off. We started doing a whole series of them because we just had to have some humour. Everywhere we looked, each garden village, and I think there are now 43, could be, had some kind of wonderful utopian vision. You know, a village in a park. I mean, in one place, we thought it sounded more like a sort of holiday village, really, centre parks or something like that, you know. But we noticed that many of the elements that you get in a village, the places that you would use and walk to, and the parks, the open spaces, that all contribute to a green place and can be seen in real garden cities, certainly in Letchworth. It's fantastic, the open spaces there. You do need public money to build them, and you need public money to maintain them too. Also, small shops and businesses are hard to establish if you've got really high rents or rates, you know, and you haven't even provided the right size of unit for them. We found the developer often ends up financing road building, which is pretty expensive, flood attenuation, biodiversity mitigation, pedestrian bridges over and under motorways or crossing major roads, and of course, connection to power, sewage, and so on. There are endless discussion on the percentage of affordable homes. It goes on and on. And gradually, the original vision may not be as viable as thought. And as Matthew Taylor highlighted, another model of financing and place such places ultimately surely needed. I mean, that was our conclusion. And on the transport side, so imagine you've got all these garden villages that are now saying everyone's going to walk. It's all going to be local. It's a new future, low carbon, blah, 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 blah. It goes on. So on the transport side, what's very interesting is that major consultancies are trying to rectify the fact that these places are in the wrong location and may not have enough money by suggesting all kinds of innovative transport, including electric bikes, yes, scooter hire, car sharing, car clubs, multiple occupancy car, so you share cars, I suppose, but you actually, I don't know, multiple park is what they call it. Accessibility in scoring to inform parking. That's quite interesting because parking is one of the problems. The number of spaces that you provide is very contentious for new homes. On-demand bus services rather than normal bus services. Green corridors over motorways and major roads, etc., etc. And we looked at Culm Garden Village, which is in East Devon. East Devon. It's just the other side of the M5 from Cullompton, in fact. And we looked just very recently at what they are suggesting for transport, and we were somewhat amused to find that they had quoted our report, considering that WSP is a large consultancy, and surely they don't get that. But they obviously want to do it. They say all the right things. They quote our report and they say, well, we're going to do something different. But the question is, how can they? Is it possible? And having seen that, I'm going to get in touch with them and ask them to see how it's going. They quoted out, they've got 2 pages on our report, so let's find out. But even that transport thing, they all are now concentrating on sustainable travel within the development. Okay, they're not looking that much at travel in and out of the development. This is old-fashioned for what they call self-containment. So you will not find talk of metros, trams, or the equivalent, reaching out to new garden communities and to developments in other countries, or even tram systems or light rail or tram-like buses, which do work, for our garden towns like Taunton, Didcot, and Didcot Oxford area. I mean, there are so many areas where the number of new homes is just extraordinary. Surely they should be coordinated around a new urban transit system. No, that does not seem to be the case. And that is something which I feel is a real mistake myself. So for those who don't drive, I mean, if you want to go to see your grandchildren at the theatre, you might go to Hospital. I mean, these are just examples. If you go and live in one of these estates, what do you actually do? Well, if you don't drive, I don't think you go to live there because you wouldn't start. So in a way, it's limiting, this model of development is limiting choice. I know my daughter, who doesn't want to have to drive with children, she has noticed that it's getting quite, none of these places offer the kind of public transport that she would expect to go and live there. So buying 2 cars is expensive, running 2 cars is expensive. And, all of this has to be considered. And in a way, the choice is limited if you don't build something that works better from a transport point of view. And I won't go on, I'm sure I've done it long, but taking a step back, so we have looked at this problem more generally. So that's the specifics. We've looked at it more generally, and it's an incredibly complicated subject. But something we did was to take all these garden villages, urban extensions, cowpack developments, whatever you like, and we began to plot them covering at least in the area of the southwest and the south, against the density of jobs. So the underlying map shows job density, and you can see mostly Bristol, London, Southampton, there's various things. And then on top of that, we plotted large greenfield developments where they will be built. And as you can see, even without seeing all the details, it's a very strange dispersed model of development. Now, if you build in that dispersed model, you cannot serve public transport. I can just tell you, is not viable. You will end up with car-based development unless you begin to coordinate all the build around new metros and so on. But ultimately, it's not the right model. And I was amazed when I looked at the population change. This has been recent data that's just come out from the Office of National Statistics from the census. What they've got is you can play with this, it's an interactive map. And it shows where the population is going up in the country. And what is so amazing is how it's rising in rural areas. And they do talk about this in their discussion on the results. So they say, well, yes, there is this trend to people are moving to rural areas, and many of these places, when you look, have got very high housing targets, and they will have those high housing targets again and again and again, because that's how the housing number works. It's people might go, oh well, if they're going to build 5,000 homes over there, I suppose at least we're safe. And then a few years later, next revision of the local plan, of course, once again, you have got to find room for a whole bunch of homes, and so it happens again and again. Anyway, I can't prove it, but it does. You do wonder whether what is called, I believe, counter-urbanisation, where we're sort of moving out of our cities, whether this isn't helped by the plan system. There's also, as you can see, a south, to do with the south as well. But even rural areas in the Midlands have got a hell of a lot of new estates, and we've been to see them, and even around, funnily enough, down Newcastle, we've seen some country. So, since coming to them, our concern is that at national level, there seems to be a lack of comprehensive integrated approach to spatial planning. It does seem just not to be there. Much instead seems to be about housing money. Right? We are moving to places that don't fit into a sustainable, low-carbon future in terms of spatial planning. Now, I don't know, I can whiz through where the housing numbers come from. I've tried to sum it up. I don't know if that's useful, but having said that, having realised that housing somehow is the numbers are in the wrong place, where do these targets actually come from? And it's very complicated. We have tried to explain it, but it does start with population growth. Then you get it's translated to local household growth, and you can look up the local household growth data on the internet if you like. I think that is the key word you have to type in. And that will show you for each local authority how the population has grown over the past number of years. And it's from and that figure, so if you've got a high growth, it's then used as part of the algorithm to generate future growth. So it's from the household growth that you get the baseline housing need, it's called. And every planning authority has a baseline housing figure, which you can discover. Then the algorithm is applied to the baseline, and various other parameters come in at that point to increase the basic housing need. In yellow, because I haven't really understood this, apparently now the 20 largest cities, there's going to be a 35% uplift in figures. But that seems to be going on independently from calculating the housing need everywhere else, which I think seems illogical. That appears what's going on.
So just to clarify that, so the setting of the target, is that determined by central government?
Yes, at this stage.
Trying to separate the government piece from the group.
Yeah, at this stage it is. Although I don't know, there may be other, even at this stage, there may be other things one doesn't know about. But one thing is true, that if you have a lot of green belt locally, or area of outstanding natural beauty, I believe there's an immediate map on numbers. So that is where national government has come to that conclusion. So obviously for places like the New Forest, the numbers are very low. But what I don't understand, if there is going to be, and they're quite clear about it, a 35% uplift to the urban local authority top 20 cities, does that mean that everywhere else will have a reduced number? And I have asked it, and I have not found, and no one's given me a satisfactory answer yet. So after that, with those, there's a call for sites by the local authorities. Promoters and developers come forward with their site. Then you get site selection, and site selection is done using national policy. The planning practice guidance gives you, as a local authority, the directions for selecting sites, and you have to select strategic sites which will, you believe, go forward and be built. Big strategic sites. Small sites, well, you need to read the final lettering, but ultimately the emphasis seems to be on big sites. So we've highlighted this, the PPG. It's the housing and economic land availability assessment. I mean, that's the, and it all looks very technical, but you know, it's not that bad. I understand what it is. Anyway, so as part of land promotion, marketing exercise, then you have all the usual stuff. And it will show how any adverse effects can be mitigated. But of course, the master plan is a marketing document. It's not binding. I mean, that's a very important thing. It's not a binding document. It's more a piece of, I don't know if salesmanship is quite the right word. It's because aspirational. There we go. Aspirational. Yeah. And then an import with transport. There is a transport assessment, but it's not about things like, so could we have a new station maybe right next to this estate? Or, sorry, could we maybe think about having a new cycle route going right into town? It's not that kind of thing, really. It's usually 95% of these things for greenfield sites, not brownfield sites, but greenfield sites, are about traffic impact. And so you do a big model of the roads, then you imagine all the thousands of new cars coming out of the estate, then you see which junctions are gummed up, then you ask the developer to make junctions bigger, and so you increase the capacity of the road network for the purpose of mitigating any effects of increased numbers of cars. Eventually, if the site may go into the local plan and health application. And garden villages are estates for garden towns, are all part of this machinery, actually. It seems to us anyway, as if the numbers and parts offered, got something going along to it. Offered, yes, guided where we were building, and the transport and other aspects of sustainability were then retrofitted the best we could. Okay, so that's it. So it seemed to be about housing numbers and then developer sites offered. Once we realised this, we came up with this phrase, upside down geography. So the housing targets appeared to be the input, the land put forward was there, and then the concept was build and mitigate. So there was carbon, well, we have to deal with that. Flooding, I'm sure that's possible. Nitrate and phosphate pollution, well, the governments are messing around with that, we'll somehow get past it. Biodiversity impact, well, don't worry, it's actually going to be biodiversity again. And sustainable transport, underlined, considered far too late. Because if it was considered earlier, you probably wouldn't be building there in the first place. So, in conclusion, what are we going to do? Can garden villages work? Or is there a better way of building? Ideas from the public, welcome. There we are. Oh yeah, I'll just say, as a matter of marketing, there are 3 reports you can download from our website, which is, if you type in transport for new homes into Google, I think you'll be taken to it. The first is this one, and that's our first lot of visit, and it's got a lot of recommendations at the back to the government, actually, and it's also got more about our visit to the Netherlands. The second one is the garden villages and towns, and there are a couple, I think I've got 2 or 3 with me actually, so that's also available. And our latest one is called Building Car Dependency. We revisited a lot of the places we've been to, and further recommendations.
So what date's the last one?
The last one is 2022. Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, if I may kick off, I believe that you, during the day, went to visit the site
Oh yeah.
for the projected Dorchester. What do you think of it, given your expertise?
Well, it's a classic cowpat, I would say. I went along the river actually and could see where it was going and saw lots of those stuff, people complaining about it. But it will be. I mean, the trouble is, it's not even part of the town. It's enormous, and it's, you know, I don't. Has it got into the local plan? Is it
In the draft.
And what? Because I mean, it is well. To me, it's likely to end up as a car dependent development. Does it come with a new road by any chance?
Yes.
Oh, it does.
Through it, and it serves 2 purposes. Extension of the bypass to take people away from Hilltown and from the people living in the new town, and also to serve the new town.
Oh yeah.
So you've got traffic going fast and traffic going slow,
That's
and
another.
people trying to cross.
Right. Yes. Another problem. The answer is.
Sorry, can I just repeat the question because those online can't quite hear, sorry. So the question was asking, how do you factor in other, metrics like average numbers of cars per household, and the way since the pandemic, the households have used delivery services more. You know, that's an extra element of accessibility, ease of access rather, into the equation?
Yeah, I don't think anyone knows, actually. There is something called TRICS. Have you come across that? It's called TRICS, TRICS. And it is a technical, it's what they use to calculate the trip rate for each house in a development. And that now, even TRICS, it's what they use in transport assessments. And only recently has there been an accurate data based on a real life estate available. I think it's based on an out of town estate somewhere near Cambridge, said Nate. But the idea with TRICS is that you select a place that's similar, and using the data from that, you can predict what will happen elsewhere. The problem up till now was that I could never find anywhere where TRICS had done a data model that was a proper CalPAT development. But now, and I'd have to send you a link to it because it's still at draft stage, the TRICS techies have done one. So if you write a note, I'll send a link to that.
Okay.
And yeah.
We've got a couple of questions online as well. Anita's asking, the Royal Town Planning Institute seems to be heavy advocates of garden cities /towns/villages. What's your opinion of this?
I think, like everybody else, there is a feeling that we really ought to be building nice places. I think there has been a reaction to the kind of estates that we've seen in our visits all up and down the country. It's a big reaction. And it's, people have in mind a kind of a better place. And the RTPI probably believe that, and a lot of people, fair enough. The problem is delivering places that actually live up to that kind of specification. And I don't know if the RTPI understand the importance of location. I think the reason why Poundbury worked, apart from anything else, is that it is genuinely connected to Dorchester. I think I've been 3 different ways into Poundbury, and also it had such a very firm vision and and a whole team to carry it through. So the RTPI may not realise, they are being hopeful, let us say. They are being hopeful without maybe understanding the real difficulties. I don't know. But lots of people, when you look at the vision of the garden community, you think when you go to Letchworth, you do realise it's nice, but it has got a lot of public provision. It has a whole load of local amenities. It's got trees, it's got plantings, well maintained. I even saw a rare orchid in a little mini nature reserve when I was in Letchworth, because I was on my bike and I'm always looking out for interesting wildflowers, and there they were. And I thought, well, this is because Letchworth has a garden city that's maintained, and I think there are covenants on buildings, all sorts of things. So I wonder if the RTPI are aware of all the difficulties actually getting delivery.
Sorry, can I just summarise, because again, people can't hear online. So David's saying that he doesn't agree with Poundbury being held up as an example, and has got a long list of things where he feels it doesn't quite meet the criteria of the example. David suggesting Stevenage Newtown as a good, a better example in his opinion of somewhere that was pre-designed for pedestrians and cycles with separate networks and underpasses and front doors that open onto pedestrian areas rather than motorised areas.
Well, I'd just like to say, first of all, I'm not commenting on the architecture. Personally, I'm not personally particularly keen on Queen Mother Square, but I won't go into that. But functionally, when you visited all these other places, it is the only one which has got things actually in it. I mean, there are shops. I mean, okay, so it's a Waitrose and this and that. There are shops, cafes, I can't describe the contrast between some of these big places like Cranbrook. There's nothing. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but what I'm saying is that it has achieved functionally a load of stuff which we haven't seen in most places. There is another place, I ought to just tell you, near York, there's a place called Derwentthorpe. Now, Derwentthorpe has been developed by the Joseph Rowntree Trust, and that is really nice. And I would recommend that. We thought it's not posh in the same way, it's an ordinary place, but it's really nice.
So a quick summary is, someone's made the point that there's no mention in any of the planning around employment and the fact that everyone needs their cars to get to and from work, but there's no corresponding creation of local employment opportunities, something like that.
I'd just say that this all comes under the general feeling that if you want to build a whole new load of homes for the population and you want them to be able to get to work, to services and so on, it does seem strange that we're not building around non-car modes like, light rail, tram, buses. You've got to put the infrastructure in. You can't just expect people to not drive and not go to places. I mean, I come from a public transport campaigning background. That was my original thing, particularly rail. And, also I've lived in Europe, in various places. This is what's lacking. We've somehow forgotten that we are actually a densely packed country and we have got a traffic problem mounting up. We do need to do things differently, even for that reason, and that's one of the things. So.
Okay, we've got a question from Kate. Is it likely that the DOR 13 site north of Dorchester is the only place in the whole Dorset Council area that meets the basic criteria for garden community?
That I don't know. I really don't know. Pass on that one because I don't know.
Where would you find the definition of basic criteria for garden community?
If you look in the Garden Communities prospectus from 2018, they do describe roughly what they're looking for, but it's not very definitive. But I have to say, a lot of places that used not to be called garden communities now are. I mean, even where we live, we suddenly got told that it's been renamed as a garden community, even though it hasn't got funding from government and isn't on the official list. So it's there were urban extensions, there were eco towns. I mean, all kinds of things through planning, and now garden communities are the latest thing. But
marketing badges.
I suppose so, but I still think there is this underlying vision. I mean, I do think people want to believe that they can build these lovely places. They really do. I meet consultants. There are loads of groups who would love to build some really lovely places, but somehow the system doesn't deliver so far. I mean, when you look, these garden communities take decades to build. Literally, some of them, I was looking at one, where was it, Falls Need or somewhere up north, 30 years of gradual build out, well, like Poundbury. So, I'm talking partly theoretically here, but it doesn't look that promising, but maybe things will change.
Of course, before eco settlements and STEM settlements, there were urban villages.
Oh yeah, there were.
Which were the brownfield,
yeah,
you could say, dream visions.
Yeah.
Which, well, is that the way forward? Back to urban village concept?
Well, we've seen some developments, urban ones, that are really quite nice. But we've also seen a couple that weren't actually. So
We've got another question online on a similar topic. Do you think the emerging examples of co-housing offer something more? Co-housing. I don't know what that is. Anita, do you want to tell us what co-housing is?
Yeah, sure. There's a few co-housing examples in London, and there's one in Bridport. It's hard to explain, but it's it's really where people, it's not a commune, but it's sort of getting, politically it's nothing like a commune, but it's where people live together. Their houses are more sort of integrated, and there are more communal social spaces. I can't describe it better than that because there are so few examples.
Self-built.
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
Some of it's self-built.
Yeah.
It's a community.
Some of it can be self-built. It doesn't have to be self-built. The idea is that people are much more, integrated into each other's lives. There are communal gardens, communal areas.
Sounds good, yeah. But, most of these big estates, I suppose, one of the things, they're built for a certain kind of lifestyle. But, but it sounds interesting, and I certainly think that there needs to be more variety in these places, different ways of living, different types of accommodation. They often are pretty same,
Another question in the room, and then we come back to Philip's question online.
So one of the issues for us in a rural county is obviously rural transport, and I know your work has mostly been around these larger developments. But there are villages that want to grow and want to have more houses and on a small scale, and then struggle with, as they develop neighbourhood plans, how to conceptualize a transport system. And I just wondered if your group has had any thoughts about that. Because if we're sort of arguing that large scale urban type developments on greenfield sites are not the right kind of houses in the right place, we could argue that smaller scale development associated with villages has some traction. Then how do we build connectivity? And I just wondered if your group investigated that.
We haven't looked at that, but I know in another, the CPRE, certainly Wiltshire CPRE was really interested in demand responsive buses for that very purpose. And if villages were willing to accept small, maybe, I don't know what I mean by small development, maybe 100 houses, 50 or something, whatever, and grow, that would be an interesting way of growing a rural area, rather than just one big plonk of, that would be quite interesting, but that's something which I'm not aware that the government is looking at, surprisingly. And as for, and these demand responsive buses, that is the way that it's moving. And now that people use their phones, I suppose, and they're used to the idea of quickly, let's just pull up a bar, do something quickly, Uber, taxi, whatever, it might work. Yeah.
Okay, I've got a question for Philip. How does what's been said tie in with what the IPCC said on 4th of April 2022 on the worldwide need to be reducing carbon by 2025?
Oh, well. Our experience of, from the people I work with, certainly what we've found is that there doesn't seem to be a proper discussion about spatial planning and climate change. So, if you want to reduce the need to travel by car and you want people to use active travel and all this, surely we're just building in the wrong places. But there isn't a strategy at national level when it comes to spatial planning, not so far. Nor is there that much interest in emissions from transport. I mean, that may be changing because I think a select committee has reported something about this, but it's as though when they say zero carbon, our impression is it's usually about the houses themselves, or, you know, it's not as though they discuss the consequences of 7,000 car journeys per day from a enormous new development. It doesn't seem to be going on. There is this assumption that electric cars are the solution, that it's all right if they're electric. That's the other, which is yet another conversation, as they say.
So talking about come back to the point about small developments, is that because the input to that funnel that you showed before is all developer driven?
I think,
and they prefer to go for the biggest plot possible so they can sell as many units and have the highest density they can.
I think it's right. First of all, I mean, I only speak from experience around the table at local plan examinations in public. It seems that the local authority is so desperate to satisfy the so-called housing need. I mean, that is the bottom line. As far as the inspector is concerned, have you got a sound plan, which the top metric is your housing ambition? So that's where it begins to go wrong, because the reliable deliverers of the housing are turned out to be the big developers with legal representatives around the table. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary fair. I just can't, you are suddenly there with the county council sitting there looking rather slightly worried maybe. And then there's a whole wall of developers and their legal representatives who have submitted evidence about how they are definitely going to deliver X thousand number of houses. And this is what the planning inspector wants to hear. The small developers, I don't know, I mean, 20 houses here, 50 there, they're called windfall sites quite often, it seems. And implying that if they come forward as well, it will be a jolly good thing, but they're not added into the strategic total. That's my impression from. But I mean, the whole machinery is so peculiar and complicated. And bearing in mind, so the local plan inquiry, days and days will be spent disputing housing need, because developers may very well up the need if they fear that their development is not going to be included. The ordinary person is just left stranded as these discussions go on. But my personal understanding from sitting around the table is that a lot of brownfield sites even are discarded as not strategic, merely windfall, and that's a disappointment. And so I fear the same might be true of small sites in villages and so on. But, it's a very technical subject, and I can only give a sort of layman's opinion from my own experience here. And,
because you're a planning background, but
yeah.
One of the interesting things when you study the planning system and house building is that during the 1990s, there was the big push, supported particularly by the CPRA, for brownfield development.
Yeah.
And before, when that happened in the early 90s, the developers said, we can't build on brownfield, it's too expensive, too many risks involved. But then within 10 years, like 90% of their production moved from greenfield to these are big builders to brownfield. So it can be done. But you do need and what we don't have is a government steer vision, you might call it, to push for that. And you rely on people like Prince Charles to be a one-off here and there to develop something similar, but not the same. So yeah, so it's been done, but it required a consistent message from both Conservative and Labour governments during the 1990s.
Well, certainly, it will be interesting with this latest national planning policy framework and the Levelling Up Act and so on. They definitely want this increase of 35% up the numbers required in 20 cities. So, I mean, that is going to be very interesting because surely that can only be accomplished by a lot more brownfield sites. But what surprises me is I can't see the dialogue going. You know, I can be presented with this is the suggested new text, but I can't really understand further than that. But it's promising, surely. It sounds vaguely promising. But, you know, this you might be getting the flavour of what it's like. It's not, it's such a, it's very hard to put a finger on lots of aspects of planning, which is why there are so many consultants involved at every single level. You know, it's a really complicated business.
So the question is about the impact on villages of a more dispersed form of development and whether it cause problems within those villages which accept development.
Well, I mean, it's quite interesting, really, the concept of dispersing more in the village. I think what I'm going to do is to take it up with somebody next time I'm at a meeting with the right people. I'd like to know what the line is of the government on this. You know, yes, has it been considered?
You should speak to, there is a group of MPs who are in favour of this.
Who's leading them?
Well, I don't know, Chris London is part of it, so we could contact him. Yeah.
I mean, do you think that it would be a popular solution to distribute development more like that?
Avoiding too much being done on one particular village.
I think that's the consultation. Villages.
Exactly.
Most villages have got a few.
Just speaking to Space Flower, I think it was last year, my husband and I raised this very issue about the importance of the, dispersing potential development. And he was absolutely adamant that he was against it because he said that the funding didn't follow for the necessary improvements to infrastructure. And that he just ruled it out, and that was it.
Yes.
There is the community infrastructure levy, which is a sort of stop in that direction, which does allow for a tax on new housing development to allow it to be spent more flexibly than a Section 106 agreement, which is tied. So you could say maybe through a more advanced version of that might deal with some of the issues, I would say all the issues.
Neighbourhood plan is another consideration. You know, different people, different places will have different take on it. But it would be,
That's where communities express their wish.
Yes. And at the moment, of course, the neighbourhood plan is, it has to be in conformity with the county plan, the local plan. And that means that people can be surprised by having to suddenly assimilate a giant housing estate and take it into their local. I was on the neighbourhood plan housing group. I was in Brampton Neighbour, and that's what happened to us. At the last minute, we had to quit. But it's an interesting one because the thing I sense, as a relative newcomer into this whole area, the thing that I find discouraging is that so much time is spent trying to make communities accept things they don't want. It's, they can be called NIMBYs and all that, but it just goes on. And that to me there's something obviously wrong there. And when we were in the Netherlands, I did ask about this. I said, do you not have this problem? And the spatial planners said, no, because what happens is, if we're going to expand a place like we've had to expand Utrecht and build a hell of a lot of houses, like, you know, I don't know, 100,000, something extraordinary. It was part of the Dutch national strategy that we were going to have to expand certain chosen places. Utrecht, one of them. We then compulsorily purchased land that was considered by the town not to be valuable from an ecological or a recreational or agricultural thing. So we did a proper analysis. We came up with certain parcels of land, and we knew, everybody seemed to understand that yes, sadly, this has got to happen because the country needs it to happen. And in return, we will build all kinds of things for the existing communities on this new land that will be not just for housing, but for lots of other things too. And it was amazing what they built. You know, we saw new libraries, we saw a new urban farm, we saw the most amazing playgrounds designed by the children from the existing suburbs when a new part was going to be built. We saw really good town centres, 6 new stations with turn up and go frequency trains, to the point which they all, I mean, when we were all on one of them, we just missed the train. And I said, oh my God, we've missed the train. We were having coffee. When's the next one? We have to wait an hour or something? And they all just burst. They said, they're every 8 minutes. I said, I mean, I can't, you know. And so this adversarial aspect of planning in this country, I find quite upsetting. You know, I go around, and especially, you know, when I was with on the Wiltshire CPRE executive, you know, we would hear from villages all over the place about, oh, another 350 homes. Oh no, now next door so-and-so's put in an application. Then the 5-year housing land supply, that's another big game. You know, and somehow doesn't make sense. It's not an efficient geography-based way of national planning. And that's just, as I say, you know, just the way I personally feel. One thing I must just tell you very briefly, that in the Netherlands, something which completely surprised us when I said to them, so when you plan a big area, how come you get all these cycle routes, walking routes, and rapid transit routes all carefully planned, with all the houses and the parks all nicely fitting in? How do you do it? And they couldn't understand. They said, well, we do it. And I said, what about the developer? And they said, the developer? I'm sorry, what do you mean? I said, well, don't you have developers just saying, well, we're building here, we're going to do, and they just went, no, look, here we are, the local planners, we specify the big urban extension, right down, of course, to the cycle routes, the metro routes, the legal stations. We do everything. Here are the plans. And I said, oh, so the developers, do you mean the builders? I said, maybe I mean the builders. Okay, the builders, do they always build what you want? Well, they have to. And then I said, but don't they sometimes make a fuss? They said, oh yes, we once had a builder, they've been commissioned to build some large, some low-rise apartment blocks. And they tried to come and say they were going to make them 8 stories high instead of 5. They came and my boss said, I'd like to see them. And everyone went, oh dear. Anyway, they came in, apparently tried to argue the height up, and they were sent away in disgrace because the plan quite basically said 5 stories, not more. And so it's just entirely different, a totally different way of planning.
The Dutch approach is interesting, but it is based on a long-established culture,
Yes,
a very well-established national and regional, sub-regional planning framework.
Yeah.
And thirdly, economics, because the developers can't prepare the land. Because
Right.
basically the state has to step in because most of the Netherlands has peat, and you have to pile the housing. So it's huge costs in
That's
setting
true.
up a housing
yeah,
site.
yeah.
So that gives the state the opportunity to basically step in, take land ownership at an agricultural value, and then use the uplift to spend on putting trams in from day one.
Yep.
And specifying exactly the building codes that have to be built. I remember I went for a research project many years ago about energy efficiency in UK housing. We were looking at Reading and fuel poverty. And I tried to get someone involved from Denmark, and this guy, because we needed partners, European partners, and this guy said, "Well, there's not a problem. We don't have a problem. You know, why do you want me involved in this project? Because we just don't have the same any of those problems with energy efficiency in housing in Denmark." But I said that's why we want you in, to show how it's done. And the Dutch are very good at showing us how it could be done, but it has some special histories.
Yeah. And attitude, I
Yeah.
think,
And the development industry, again, is very interesting, I would say. Because we are talking big sites, it tends to be attractive to big developers. And it's the big developers that tend to have the ear of government. I went to a research project on housing in central government. I was interviewed by the HBF for a research project funded by the government to look at housing land supply. That's how well they're established in there. But if you don't have big sites, it attracts a different type of industry. The smaller developers
Absolutely.
are given a feed-in.
Yeah.
And certainly, when I worked on housing land in Yorkshire, we had half of our district area was big developers coming in trying to get big housing sites, and basically all the land was held by local builders. And the national builders were up in uproar. So you haven't got any land supply, and we had. It's just it was in the control of local builders. So it's very interesting to look at the economics and the building industry structure that has the implications of this. It has implications for the way that we might try and plan it. So you have to rethink it.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's me going on. Thank you. I will leave on that basis the conversation. Thank you very much, Jenny, for coming along, stimulating a lot of questions and thoughts. And,
well, it's not an easy subject to solve.
No, lots of debate. Thank you very much.
I